You may already know about how to share a state using React's built-in useContext mechanism. Now, the way most people implement it, everything from the provider on down will re-render anytime that state is changed, which is fine for low velocity data like the user identity or the theme. But what if you want to share high velocity data, where re-rendering the application every time would not be good for performance? Well, I'm here to tell you it can be done. And by the end of this video, you will have code that you will need no additional third-party libraries for to share state performantly throughout your application using just React's built-in context mechanism. Let's get right into it. So here we have the demo application for this video. I've styled it in a way where you can see visually the component structure. So you have the app component on the outside, then within that, the content container, and within that, the form container, display container, and then within those, the form container has two fields in it, two text inputs. You can change the text input for first, and then it shows up in the first down there. And this is totally fine, but there's actually chaos going on. Well, not really chaos, but let's go check it out. So if I bring up the inspector, and I make sure that over in the components panel that I have, if I have Redux, I go over to the gear in there and I make sure that highlight updates when component render is on. Then I can kind of see these component renders. So if I type in here again, every time I type a character, the entire app re-renders. You can see that from that blue flash there. So a lot of app re-rendering going on. And the reason for that is because app holds the state of the first and last. And anytime that you have a useState and you set that state, then everything from that component down re-renders. So that's why the entire app is re-rendering. And that state is shared via context. Now that kind of state sharing, just using context to share useState, is fine for low velocity data, the user ID, the theme, things like that. But this is high velocity data. This changes with every single keystroke. So we really don't want to do that. In fact, the ideal output here is if I were to change a letter in J there, only this component, the first component with the text input, and then this display would change. So by the end, we'll get there, and using context and with just the hooks based right in React. Okay, the first thing we're going to do though is we are going to recreate this. So we see how this works and we see if we can make some small enhancements on it, which we can, and then we'll get into the fast context. Okay, so over here in the code, which is available to you on GitHub for free, in the link in the description down below, there is a folder there called Starter. There are also the other folders that are the completed applications, but I'm going to start here with Starter and show you what's going on. So we've got our components. We start down here with app that has the content container in it. We've got the content container, which includes the form container and the display container which has the displays, and then the form container that has the text inputs. And the text inputs are basically the input wrappers that look at a particular value or field, in this case, first or last, and they give the input for that. Same thing with the display. They're showing either first or last. And then we specify that down here at the first and last as values. Now, of course, before you write in the comments and say, you could do all this with props, it's so much easier, this is a really small app, what are you doing? You don't need context for this. Yes, I get it. It's a small app. When you do videos like this, you create small test apps like this to show you how things are done. In reality, anytime you use context, of course, it's going to be in a much larger application. Okay, so now in the console, I'm going to do yarn dev just so we can see what we're working with. And yeah, so we've got all the text fields, but they don't do anything because there's no data going on here. So let's go and copy this into a new project folder. We'll call it simple context, and it will be a state-based context. So we can see how that works. All right, now within that, we're going to do yarn dev again. And it's the same thing. Good, so a nice clean copy there. And then let's go over into that and start making some tweaks. Okay, so what are we gonna do? Well, we need some state. So we need some state in app to hold our data. So let's go and bring in useState. And then down in here, we'll define our store. Given that useState, it'll have the first and last. And now we've got to somehow magically teleport this array, this state array here. In fact, we'll just call this the store, down to the text input and display. So how are we going to do that? Well, we could use props, obviously, but we want to try out context. We need to create some context to move that state down to those components. So we'll first bring in our create context, and then we'll create some context. We'll call it store context. And since we don't have it here, we should define it as null. That's the starting point. And then let's provide it. And now if I do Command K, Command I, TypeScript, yes, this is TypeScript, is telling us that there's a problem. You defined that the provider is null. And now you're giving me a value that is not null. It's this array that has these two items in it. What are you talking about? So what we need to do instead is we need to tell this create context that instead of just null, it could be null or the result of that use state. So how do we do that? Well, we put in these chevrons, and then we can first say that it's null. That's one option. We can use the pipe to say essentially or, and then it's going to be some sort of array, but actually that's a pretty sophisticated type. If I go over here to Command K, Command I, we can see it's an array. The first one is that object, and then the second one is this React dispatch or React set state action and blah, 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 blah. That's a lot to think about. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to copy this and make it its own custom function. And then we can use the return value of that custom function as the type here. So it makes one reusable, but it also means that we can get that type really easily. So let's create that function. Call it useStoreData. And it'll just return the output of that use state. So now we have useStoreData. If I do Command K, Command I, we can see that the output of that is that array that we want. So how do we get the type of that and put it in here? Well, we can use a utility type in TypeScript called return type. So we'll say that we have a type. It's the useStoreData return type. And it is the return type of that useStoreData. And then we can use that in here for our array. And now everybody's happy because the provider is getting a value, and that value is either null. In this case, it's not null in this case, but it is the store, and that's exactly what it's looking for. Perfect. So now we need to use it. So let's go back over here to our display. That's pretty much the easiest part to start with. And so what we need to do is get the context. So we need to use that context and then extract that value, whichever one it is, the first or the last. So let's bring in use context. We'll drop it down here into display, and we'll give it that store context. And now it's basically telling us it's unused, so let's go use it. So let's replace this empty string with that store, dereferenced by that value. But it's also telling us that that could be null. So the way that we can assert that it is not null, we know in this context that it is non-null. We've set it up here. It's never going to be the null that we initially gave it. So that's fine. So all we need to do is just put in a bang, and that basically tells TypeScript, hey, it's cool, it's not null. So that's good. Now let's do the same thing up here in text input. And we can just use this code for the value of that input. And then we need to make an on change, and that on change is gonna have to call setStore. So let's bring in that. And let's implement on that on change. So we get the event, and then we call that setStore with the current store contents. So that's why we destructure a store there. So we get both the first and last from the store. And then we overwrite just the first or last, depending on what we're looking at. So let's hit save. And now let's try it out. And wouldn't you know it, it works. How cool is that? Super easy. We teleported state all the way from app down to anywhere we want to use it in the tree. So in this case, the text input and display. But of course, it has this updating problem. So I go over here and I type again. Yep, the whole app re-renders because we have state that we declare up here, and anywhere where we set state, we are going to re-render anything from there down. Now we can do a little bit of an optimization by memoizing some stuff. So let's try that. Let's bring in React Memo. And then we can memoize a couple of components. We can memoize form container and display container and content container. And that helps a little bit. So now just the app and the fields themselves and the displays themselves, those update a little bit better, but not great. But do we really want to memoize this? I don't think so. Seems like a lot of overhead to do. And I think it's better to go, because it's high-speed data, with an entirely different approach. So we're going to call that fast context. So let's go back out and go up a directory, and then recursively copy that simple context into a new directory called fast context. And we'll bring it up. Okay, looks like it's doing good, and it's exactly where it was before. So let's go over and edit on that. Here's our app.tsx from the fast context. And let's do some things first. Let's get rid of those memos because we're not going to need those. Let's see. Now it has that same behavior it did when it started. Okay, awesome. So what's the approach here? What's the strategy? So the strategy is that we, one, can't use useState. We got to have a way to hold our data at the top level, but in a way where when it updates, it doesn't automatically cause a re-render pass from there on down. So could we use useReducer for that? Nope. The reason being that useReducer has the same semantics as useState. When you change the state, everything from that point down re-renders. Can't use that. So what we could do is we could use refs. Now, useRef associates some data with a component, but when that data changes, it doesn't force a re-render. Sounds good. Let's change up useState to useRef. So now we have store, and the value of store is in store.current. And when we set store.current, it just doesn't do anything. It just sets that current value, and then that's it. So good. But when we set it, how do we know we've set it? How does text input get alerted that things have changed? How does the display get alerted that things have changed? So what we need to do is we need to essentially create an entirely new communications mechanism between this store data and these components. And what I would recommend is that we use a pub sub model. It's a pretty good pattern. Seen a lot of good use over the years. So let's have it so that the text input subscribes to the store. And when that store changes, it gets a callback. And then same thing for display. And so the only things that actually would update when the store changes are the text inputs and the displays, which is exactly what we want. So sounds like a good model.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
So what do we want out of here? So coming out of useStore data, we're going to want a way to get the current store. We're going to want a way to set the current store, and we're going to want a way to subscribe to it. So let's go and figure out what those three things are. It's going to be an object, and it's going to have a getter. So that getter is going to be a function that returns first and last, that object we have. It's going to have a setter that's going to take that and object as a parameter and then return a void. Now I'm seeing we're repeating ourselves here. We know dry, so don't repeat yourself. So let's go and specify that as a type. And then reuse it. And then next we need a subscribe function. And the current hotness and subscribe functions that you give it a callback, and then the subscribe function itself returns to you a function, which is your unsubscribe. It's a really clean approach to doing subscribe and unsubscribe. So that's what we've got. And then lastly, I do want to make this a little bit easier to use. So I want it to be where when I set, I don't have to give it the full object. I can just give it part of the object. Like if I just want to set first, I just give it an object with first. So what I can do for that is I can say that we want a partial store, which means that you can send me any parts of the store and it makes them all optional. Okay, so let's start building this out. So we're not going to return the store. We are going to create a getter. So let's do that. It's just a function that's going to return the current store. Now this is a custom hook. And when you build custom hooks, I recommend that anytime you're building a function that you're going to return out of a custom hook, that you wrap it in the use callback. And the reason is that you don't know how the consumer of this custom hook is going to use this. And they could put that get in a dependency array. And what's going to happen with this useStoreData is anytime it's rerun, it's going to give you a new get. If I just return this out of here, every time useStoreData would get run, then we would get a new reference to get every single time, and we would trip any dependency arrays down the line that depended on get. So the way that we can get around that is we can use everybody's least favorite hook, use callback. Why it's everybody's least favorite hook, I don't know. I love use callback. I think it's great. So I'm going to wrap this into use callback. And then we need to specify a dependency array. Now this is going to be evergreen. It's never going to change. That get is always going to remain the same because this store reference is always going to remain the same. Current will change, but that's okay because get is just going to dereference store. And so that's fine. It'll just return the most recent value of current every single time. Okay, so now let's do our setter. And again, we use callback. And then we'll just set the store to be everything that's in the store currently plus whatever you give us. So any override. So we just want to set first, just give us first, and we'll take the last that we had before. And again, we'll use an empty dependency array because we're getting value coming in, so it's not stale, and the store.current is never stale because we're dereferencing off of the store reference. Okay, so that's our setter. And now we need our subscribe. So our subscribe needs to have a list of subscribers. Let's use useState for that. Nah, because if we used useState, again, we would get into that refresh cycle. Now that would only refresh 4 times because we're only going to get 4 subscriptions from the 2 text inputs and the 2 display counts, but still, we don't want it. So let's use a useRef for that. Besides, we really don't need it. So let's try the useRef. So okay. So let's say that we have a subscriber list. And we'll use useRef. And now we could use an array for that, but if you were to subscribe with the same function multiple times, you would get multiple instances in the array, which you'd then have to delete. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. So the easiest thing to do here is to use a set. Now a set is just like an array, but you can only add the same value once. So the first time you give me a particular function reference for a callback, if you give it to me 10 times, I'll just have it in the array once. So that's good. So let's use a set for this. And that set is just going to be a set of functions that return void. That's it. Now let's create a subscribe method. And it's just going to add the subscriber to that list of subscribers. And then it's going to return an unsubscribe method where we delete that callback from that list. And again, we use an empty dependency array because, again, nothing is going to change here over time. The subscriber's reference is always going to retain the same value. Okay, so let's bring in subscribe. And we are good. Okay, so TypeScript is happy. Our output here is matching our description there. So cool, we got a useStoreData, and that's great. Let's take a look down here. Our store context is good. Now we're returning out that get, set, and subscribe or null. So let's do ourselves a little bit of a favor and create a provider here, because I'd rather that than actually have to do this store context our provider. So let's go down here and make a provider. and we'll take some children. And then we will return a store context provider with the value of the store. And we can just take that and put that in there. All right, good, cool. And we can take that provider and just drop it down into here. Oh, and we can also get rid of that useState. I should have replaced that with the useStore data from before. My bad. It was the same thing. It's fine. Okay, so we got our provider. It's good. And now the only problem is that these use contexts are looking for the old style. They're looking for the store and then the set store. So let's go and create a new custom hook called useStore that will return to them this store value and then the set store. But it'll use the get, set, and subscribe to connect to that. So let's create useStore. And first it's going to get that store context. And you know what, let's put a conditional in here to say if we don't have a store, then we'll put up a nice little error message, store not found. And so what do we want out of here? Well, we want an array, and that array would have a store as the first element and then the store setter. So it's going to take the partial store and return a void, just like this setter up here. So in fact, actually, we could just do something like this. So we do store.get, get the current value, and then we pass along store.set. The only problem is that the getter in this case just gets once. So we're going to get the current value, and then that's it. Anytime we update, nothing's going to happen. In fact, let's actually try that. So let's go over here to useStore, drop that in there, see, am I right or am I wrong? Okay, let's try it. So I hit refresh. Yeah, nothing happens. So updates go in, but nothing comes out. It's like a Roach Motel. Okay, so we need to go and subscribe to this. Now, the easiest way to subscribe to this would be to have useStore have some state in it, which is fine because useStore is going to be local to the text input or the display. So having state in it is fine. And it'll just have the initial version of that get. And then with a use effect, it will subscribe to the store. And then when the use effect unmounts, then we will unsubscribe. Cool. Okay, so let's try that. Let's add in useState and useEffect. So down here, we need to first store the state. And we'll give it the initial value of that store. And then we'll do our useEffect where we will subscribe to that store. So we will return out of our useEffect, which we will run just once. The return from the subscribe, which is in turn itself an unsubscribe. So that's the cleanup function, is the unsubscribe. And then the function we'll give it, it'll be a function that when it's called, we'll do a set state on the new value, the snapshot. And then the state we can just drop in here for the store.get. And it's not working. So why is that? Well, let's go back over here and do a little diagnostics. Okay, so we have our list of subscribers. We can subscribe. Okay. So when we do our set, which is the only time we change the state, we're not actually calling those subscribers. So let's go do that. In fact, let's move this up here. And then let's call using for each and the callback the subscribers. Okay, looks good. Let's give it a try. Oh, look at that. That is nice. Okay, that's perfect. I love it. All right, so that's really good, but we can actually do it more easily. And the reason is because down here in the useStore, we do this useState and this useEffect. There's actually a new hook in React 18. It's called useSyncExternalStore, and it's meant to do exactly this. It's meant to subscribe to some data source. Any data source will do. And then when that subscribed data source says, hey, I've changed, it will go and get a snapshot from that data source and store it locally. It basically is exactly this code. So why do we need to rewrite this? Let's go and use that. So let's do useSyncExternalStore here. And then we can conveniently get rid of our useState and our useEffect. And we can replace those with a state getter, where we call useSyncExternalStore, and then we give it our subscribe and our get from our store. Let's try it out. Woot! That is neat. I love it. That is great. Okay. So that's much easier, but we still have the issue. So we still have the issue here where we type into first. Let's do it in nicely, right? And as we're typing into first, everything lights up. So when I type in J, right, what we should see is just first and the first down here light up. And yeah, it's obviously not a big deal in this case. There's only 4, but if you had a really big store with lots of different fields in it, you would have lots of updates. So not great. So how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is we need to have each one of these components basically tell this useStore hook, hey, I'm only interested in first or last. So given a store, I just want the value that I'm interested in, first or last. And the same thing down here. And then coming out of this, instead of being the whole store, it would just be the field value. And we wouldn't have the whole store, so let's get rid of that. It's a good thing we made that a partial. Yeah. And then we'll have the same thing down here and there. But of course, we don't actually support this. So let's go and build support for that. So we got to go over here to useStore and then take a parameter. We'll call it Selector. And we'll take the store and return, well, we don't know at this point. Actually, we do. But let's just say for sake of example, it'll just be any. And we'll put in any there because that's going to be now the output. This is going to be the any. But now we need to implement on this. So what we need to do is, instead of just giving us back the whole snapshot, we need to give it a function, which will give it our selector sub-capturing of that snapshot. Is that a word? Sub-capturing? I think I just made that up. Okay, so we got our selector, we're getting that stuff, and let's see if this works. It does. How cool is that? That is awesome. So now our updates are optimal, and the only thing that changes when we change first, and first is first. How cool is that? But the field value of any is pretty lame. I got to give you that. So what we can do is we can capture the output of that selector, the type of that, and we can call that, say, selector output. And then we can say that this is going to be selector output. And the way that we enable that is we make this function generic. And now, whatever comes out of this selector is going to be the type of what comes out of that array. Let's take a look. So this one is selecting out a string. And if I do Command K, Command I here, it should say we are a string. Cool. So now we are tip to tail type safe. All right, so there we go. A very fast version of context. But of course, if you want to use this in your project, I'm guessing you probably don't have a store that has a first and last string in it. So wouldn't it be great if I were to give you a version of this that's generic that you can use on whatever store you want? Well, heck yeah. So let's do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to our console. I'm going to stop that particular server, go back up a level, and we've got starter, simple context, and fast context. So let's go and have fast context generic, and that is going to be a version that has a fast context creator function that will take any data structure that you want as an initial value and give you back everything you need to drive that the way that I've shown. So let's recursively copy that directory. And then start it up. And then hit refresh. And we are back to where we started. Good. Okay. And now I'm going to go into that directory. And then go into my app.tsx. And so what we really want to do is we want to basically take everything from here down to about there. and turn that into its own thing, its own function, this create fast context. Yeah, we'll just call it create fast context. That works. Okay, so I'll copy that and I'll create a new file. We'll call it create fast context. And we'll use TSX because that provider component has some JSX in it, so we need to use TSX. Let's paste that in there. And so we don't know what the type of store is, so let's get rid of that. And we need this new function, so let's export a default function. And we'll call it create fast context. And we'll take an initial state, and we'll call that store. And we'll specify that store is a generic. And we can take this implementation and just drop that into our function. Now we take an initial state and put it in there for that initial state. Cool. And so now we have this local set of functions. We've got useStore data, which we really only need internally here. We've got the useStore data return type, again, pretty much used internally. We've got the store context, which we have handily wrapped in our own provider. And then we've got useStore. And really what we want out of this is just this provider and this useStore. Those are the only things that we use over in the app itself. So let's return those. And now we've got this handy dandy little create fast context function. Cool. Let's go over here to the app.tsx and try it. So let's get rid of literally like, wow, most of this stuff. So let's get down here to the text input. Bye-bye. And then import create fast context. And then call it with our initial value. Start off with John Doe, sure. And then get the provider and the use store out of it. Okay, let's try it out. Awesome. Okay. Oh, that is really cool. That is really, really slick. Okay, let's just make it equivalent to what you'd get normally. Well, there you have it. An ultra fast context-based state sharing solution using just the hooks based right into React. And as you can see, it's pretty sturdy. Now, of course, I don't think you should use this for low velocity data, again, like the user ID or the theme or things like that, where it moves really slowly. I think basic state sharing using a context is fine. But if you want a state sharing solution between disparate parts of the tree where you're going to have high velocity updates, I think this is actually a pretty good solution. So give it a try. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, please put that in the comment section down below. And if you like this video, hit that like button. And if you really like the video, hit that subscribe button. And click on that bell and you'll be notified the next time a new blue collar coder comes out.